get. There we go. Thank you so much for being with us this morning. My name is Jen Park. I'm the Community Engagement and Talent Development Specialist at the Ramapo Catskill Library System. And today I'm so pleased that we have Jeffrey Weiss with us to discuss redistricting and what's occurred due to the completion of the census. But before we begin, just a couple housekeeping rules. If you are in need of a certificate of continuing education, I will be sending out an email following this session, probably tomorrow. You can just respond to that and I will issue you a certificate. And we'll also in that email be sending a link to an online evaluation form. Please go ahead and fill that out. It just takes a few minutes. And then the third thing is I will send this recording in that email as well for you to review at a later date or whenever you just want to revisit the content. So I would like to introduce our speaker today, Jeffrey Weiss. Boasts a very long bio, but I'm just going to talk about a snippet, and please, Jeff, fill in anything that I miss, which is going to be quite a lot. But Jeff has over 40 years of experience working in redistricting, voting rights, and census law. He's considered a national expert on redistricting and has been included in Roll Call's list of the top 50 Washington policy insiders. Of counsel to the Washington, D.C. law firm Sandler, Reif, Lamb, Rosenstein, and Birkenstock, P.C., Professor Weiss has assisted many state legislative leaders, members of Congress, and other state and local government officials on redistricting and voting rights matters across the nation. He's currently a professor, but he's also been, you've probably seen his name a lot because he's actually been hosting a lot of webinars surrounding this topic. And if you were involved in complete count efforts, you probably saw Jeff attending some of our meetings as well. So he's been kind of all over the place. Which I suppose would be possible when everything is virtual. So without further ado, and I know I cut off a lot of the bio, so my apologies, but I'm going to go ahead and turn that on over. So thank you.
Well, thanks very much, Jen, and good morning, everybody. I have been around for, I guess, quite some time, and pre-pandemic, I think I made 2 or 3 trips to the Orange County and several more trips to the Sullivan County Census Complete Count Committee efforts, and spent a lot of time working through New Year Counts 2020 on the census count, especially in the Catskills, given, as you all probably know, the very low response rate, especially in Sullivan County. And we will be seeing the actual results, block by block, neighborhood by neighborhood, sometime in mid-August. I'll be covering that in my presentation. I am now in my 5th cycle working on redistricting and census. By way of additional background, I've served as a counsel to 5 state assembly speakers and 4 state Senate Democratic leaders. And at New York Law School, we're providing a very nonpartisan education, training, and resource center on redistricting. We're working on state redistricting this year, and next year, the towns, counties, and cities that have single member legislative bodies will also be redistricting. So we've got well over about a year and a half ahead of us with redistricting at various levels of government. So what I'll do today in the next half hour or so is present an overview at the 30,000 foot level of the redistricting process. Not a very easy one, but hopefully one that within a short period of time, you'll have a better idea of. So what I'm going to do is share my screen and go through a PowerPoint. I recently saw on MSNBC, the historian John Meacham said that those who use PowerPoints have neither, but given that this is a rather complicated process, I will take the liberty of using a PowerPoint. So here we see, let me just adjust my screen here. Well, I'll start. Hopefully this session will unravel and explain what redistricting is all about. So first, like, why does redistricting matter? Well, redistricting is the building block of political power, both in terms of representation and funding. Now, I often tell people, look outside your window, your streets, your hospitals, your senior centers, your schools, everything that government funds is driven by how money is allocated, how programs are run, and who represents you in Washington, Albany, and your local town, city, and county governments. And this all derives first from the census for the numbers, and secondly, through redistricting as to who represents you at the various levels of government. Just one note on how much money New York receives based on census data. There are over 300 federal programs that are driven by census numbers. Of those 300, 16 programs are based on per capita funding, per person. And for 16 programs alone, and that's transportation, healthcare, education, infrastructure repair, just individual programs, each New Yorker benefits by $2,687. That's just for 16 programs. We can imagine that given all the different formulas that New Yorkers each benefit by many, many, many more thousands based on census data. As to political power in Washington, during World War II, New York had 45 members in the House of Representatives. Today, New York has 27 members. That's the same number the state had in the 1820s. And the state, as we know, is losing one congressional district after 2020. Although the loss of any congressional district hurts, New York lost 5 districts after 1980, 3 districts after 1990, 2 districts each in 2000 and 2010, and just 1 district in 2020. Just be mindful that according to the federal funding, the federal distribution formula, New York lost that 1 district by 89 people, about the size of a subway car in New York City. And there's almost no chance at this point that that could be challenged because the Census Bureau is very careful about how that formula is crunched and how it works. Just to give you a sense, I'm looking at some New York City maps here, the size of these districts. The size of a congressional district in New York State right now is about 717,000 people per district. And you can see, looking at these New York City districts, that they cover quite a bit of large landmass, and even bigger upstate New York. Senate districts, there are 63. That number stays the same. And then we have assembly districts, the smallest size, about 130,000 people each, and they're much smaller in size. Now, what happened as a result of Census 2020? Well, the pandemic delayed the entire census taking process. The census count, which starts in April, should have ended in July, but was extended to October. President Trump last year tried to short circuit the census count. He ended the count earlier in October than had been announced. And as we know from a Supreme Court decision denying his attempt to count citizens in the census, that created a bit of a chilling effect on many communities over a fear of being deported, arrested, or just general government intrusion. But all in all, the census, was completed in October. The population totals by state are supposed to go to the president by December 31st by statute. And that couldn't happen because of the operational delays. So instead, that was pushed off until April 30th. And in fact, the congressional reapportionment numbers were announced April 26th. And the delays also are resulting in the actual neighborhood data used for redistricting being delayed until August. which then is going to create a very expedited schedule for line drawing in New York State. So just a few definitions and numbers again. Reapportionment is simply the reallocation of a finite set of districts among states. Reapportionment is basically the redistribution of 435 congressional districts among 50 states. Each state gets one district. The remaining districts, 51 through 435, are assigned to states, allocated to the states by a formula set in federal statute. Redistricting is different. Redistricting is the actual line drawing of the boundaries of districts within a jurisdiction. Within New York State, we redraw congressional, state assembly, state senate, county legislative, town board, city council lines. That's all redistricting. Reapportionment was simply the reallocation of congressional districts. The terms are often interchangeable. I've given up being a stickler on it, so if people call it reapportionment, I'm not going to correct them and be the redistricting police on that. The redistricting data is supposed to come to the state, all states, by September 30th. But the Census Bureau has announced that the data will be available beginning on August 16th. As I mentioned before, for congressional district populations, New York's districts now have exactly 717,000 people per district. Now, I'm saying exactly because of the Supreme Court's interpretation of, in Article 1, Section 2 of the Constitution, every congressional district within a state must be equipopulous as close as is practicable. And literally, the districts in New York are, when they were drawn in 2012, either 717,000 or 717,001. For state senate, for state assembly, for local districts, the Supreme Court has interpreted under the 14th Amendment a different standard. And the courts allow a deviation or a difference in population of up to 10% from the size of the smallest to the size of the largest district. So for Congress, the size of the smallest to largest district is one person, 0%. For every other body, up to 10%. That could mean +5, -5, +7, -3. I'm going to show you some examples of that in the Ramapo Catskill region at the end of my presentation. The basic laws governing redistricting are in front of you now. We have the US Constitution's one person, one vote population equality requirement. And that's where, again, congressional districts must be equipopulous. All other districts can vary by up to 10%. And that's derived from the 14th Amendment to the Constitution. The Federal Voting Rights Act requires that districts are not be drawn to dilute the ability of minority communities to elect their preferred candidates when there are really, really high levels of racially polarized voting. So the Federal Voting Rights Act, Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act applies nationally, but it only kicks in if you have situations where there are really high levels of polarized voting and minority community voters are denied their chance to elect preferred candidates. We've seen an example of that recently in Rockland County in East Ramapo, where the school board was elected at large, and that diminished the ability of minority residents to elect school board members. So last year, a federal district court found the town of East Ramapo School District in violation of the Federal Voting Rights Act. Third, we have the New York State Constitution. That was amended last in 2014, and a lot of my presentation will focus on the new method that New York State will be redistricting under. For the last 200 some odd years, the state legislature simply redrew district boundaries themselves as a simple chapter law signed by governors. In 2014, the voters approved an amendment creating what's called the Independent Redistricting Commission to draw the lines and suggest them to the legislature for adoption. The word independent was used in the Constitution. However, in practice, the commission is not independent in that its work is approved or rejected by the legislature and the governor. The major legal issues that go into all this, in addition to complying with the state constitution and the Voting Rights Act, is to avoid racial gerrymandering. You cannot draw districts based on race and race alone, if that's the predominant factor, unless there's a Voting Rights Act violation lurking where there's minority vote dilution. You simply cannot pack minority residents into districts willy-nilly. Partisan gerrymandering, that's where you draw plans based on partisan gain. The U.S. Supreme Court has ruled 2 years ago that the federal courts will not entertain cases, will not hear cases dealing with partisan claims, but state courts could. And one of the criteria I'll show you in the state constitution provides that you neither favor nor disfavor political parties in the line drawing process, and that the state courts can hear those kind of claims. And then in New York, there were always procedural challenges to redistricting, whether in the last 4 decades, the Senate increased the size of its membership by 1 to accommodate partisan goals. We had an issue over prison gerrymandering, which is the practice of counting people in jail in state prisons where the prisons are located, not back to their homes of record. And I'll get into that later on. And then there are always issues as to whether you go to federal or state court to file claims. Often people go to court to try to get the best judge or set of judges to hear their cases. The tools we work with, the data that comes in August is called the PL 94-171 block level census data. A block is equivalent to about an election district, and that data is presented by race, age, and ethnicity. There's high-speed software that 2 or 3 vendors sell where you can add the numbers to the software and, working with a computer, move your cursor and you'll change the map, you'll change the numbers. In terms of who does this kind of work, traditionally in the legislature, LAD4, the Legislative Advisory Task Force on Reapportionment, did the work. LAD4 still exists as an advisory body to the legislature to work on demographic and census analysis. And now we have the New York State Commission, which is, I'll say, about a year late in getting started. They just got their, well, I'll get into this in my next few slides. There is a commission. There's a commission of 10 members. 8 of them are appointed by the legislative leaders. And you see here the 4 people who were appointed by Assembly Speaker Hasty and Senate President Andrea Stewart Cousins. And last week, the commission elected David Imamura, Democratic appointee, as the chair of the commission. On the Republican side, the 4 members there, you see their names. John Conway was just appointed to fill a vacancy just a few days ago. Jack Martins, a former senator from Nassau County, was elected as the vice chair. And you see here 2 former legislators from the Assembly representing the Assembly minority. These 8 commission members then met and selected 2 other independent members. These 2 people are members of neither of the 2 major political parties, although Ross Brady is active with the Conservative Party in Brooklyn. Now, the commission, they've picked their chair, although the Constitution doesn't call for a vice chair, just in terms of political parity and fairness. They did elect 1 member to serve as the vice chair. Although money was appropriated in past years for the commission to get ramped up and going over a fight with the governor. No money was spent until this year's state budget when $4 million was appropriated. And the commission is literally in the process of gaining access to that money this week. We'll learn more tomorrow when the commission has a meeting and will report as to how they're able to spend that money, since they want to get a phone number, a website, an email address. They've not been able to do any organizing right now. You cannot find a New York Commission website or even contact. They do have two co-executive directors as required by the Constitution, one each from the Democratic and Republican parties. And then the commission is tasked with following specific criteria. The first two here, population equality, which we've discussed, and the Voting Rights Act apply. But then the commission also has to look to draw districts that are compact, meaning that they are square, round, rectangular, but not districts that might have 45 or 60 jagged edges around them. Districts need to be contiguous. That means that districts, you have to be able to go from one part of a district to another part of the district and not leave the district. That's, that they be contiguous. There's also criteria that the district boundary should keep communities of interest intact. Communities of interest is a rather new aspect of redistricting law. You basically convince redistricting bodies that you live in a community of interest, that whether it's socioeconomic, religious, racial, ethnic, hospital area, a college campus area, that you could define what a community of interest is and keep them together in single districts. Districts should also follow jurisdictional boundaries by not dividing towns, counties, or cities. Districts should also not try to pair two members against each other, two incumbents. And also districts need to reflect partisan fairness, not to advantage one party over another. Now, these criteria are a lot to look at, and they're not prioritized. They're not ranked in priority order. So conceivably, the commission can say, well, they've obviously complied with population equality and Voting Rights Act compliance, as those are federal requirements. But, well, some districts might not be as compact or follow communities of interest or avoid pairing incumbents because all the other criteria were followed. And this is something that has to play out. This is really the meat and potatoes of the process to figure out how you balance all these different competing interests. The process now gets a little bit complicated, so bear with me. The commission obviously is going to need to undertake a robust outreach effort and engage the public. The commission has to follow the criteria that I just showed you. But then the commission goes through a several tiered process before the final maps are adopted. The commission can submit up to 2 separate sets of plans for the legislature and Congress to the commission. On the first round, the commission can submit a plan to the legislature and governor. If it's rejected or if a veto isn't overridden by the legislature, should the governor veto a plan, the commission goes back and draws a second round of maps. And if the second round of maps is rejected by the legislature or vetoed by the governor, then the legislature on a third round can draw whatever maps it wants on its own. Now, the governor, as I mentioned, must approve or veto the plans. The Democrats now have supermajorities of 2/3 plus in both chambers, so the governor's role won't matter as much. And these plans will be used in the 2022 elections. Now, on the deadlines here, the Census Bureau is going to be delivering the final block by block data by September 30th in a very user-friendly format. But they're calling an early set of the same data, so-called legacy data, that will be provided to the states on August 16th. And the legacy data will go through about a 1 or 2 week crunching process where the software companies will unravel the data so that the commission can begin working with it probably by late August. And this is going to give the commission only 3 or 4 months to do its work, down from the 9 months that had been planned. Under ordinary circumstances, the data would have been submitted to the states April 1st, but because of the pandemic delays, that's not going to happen. Under the state constitution's timeline requirements, the commission is supposed to make public its draft plans, data, and other information by September 15th or as soon after. If they get the data August 16th, if it takes a week to digest the data, make sure it works correctly in the computer, that's only going to leave about 3 weeks to develop a plan. And that's a tight stretch. So it could come later. And then after the first set of plans are released, the commission must hold at least 12 public hearings throughout the state. There's no hearing, the locations include the 5 boroughs of New York City, Nassau, Suffolk, Westchester, Rockland, and then Albany, Buffalo, Syracuse, Rochester. They plan on holding a hearing as well in the Southern Tier and the North Country. Right now, plans include, as soon as the website is up and running at the commission, of doing a listening tour before the data arrives, just to hear from the public. And my guess is that they will hold a virtual hearing as soon as late June, but most likely during July next month. Okay. Now, we have a bit of a complicated approval process to get a plan from the commission to the legislature. First off, the commission has 10 members. There is no 11th member tie-breaking vote. We have 4 Democrats, 4 Republicans, 2 independents. The independents have lined up on original votes for commission share, with the Democrats and Republicans creating a 5-5 tie. It is conceivable, but total, just guessing, that the commission might have a hard time agreeing on a plan. But looking at the best of all possibilities, if they are going to agree on a plan, then of the 10 commissioners, 7 of the 10 must vote to approve a plan before it can be sent to the legislature. And of those 7 members, at least 1 member from each of the 4 legislative leaders must vote favorably for a plan proposal. And if the commission cannot get 7 members to agree on a plan, then the plan or plans with the greatest support could be submitted to the legislature. Now, things get really tricky. There's a pending constitutional amendment that voters will be asked to approve or reject this November, and that's going to change some of the rules on what the commission has to do. Primarily, it removes the 7 of the 10 commissioners provision for 7 commissioners without necessarily having 1 from each of the legislative leaders, which essentially removes the veto that the Republicans now have in this process, but we'll have to see. The commission also can combine the Senate and Assembly plans, which under law have always been in the same legislative bill, and add the congressional plan to it. The Constitution sets a deadline right now of January 1st, 2022 to submit its final plan, but it's given a grace period as late as January 15th. The pending constitutional amendment that you'll be voting on in November sets the deadline hard and fast at January 1st with no January 15th grace period. And that's basically because we now have a spring primary. We're petitioning to run for office will start in early March. We did not have a spring primary in 2012 when this law was first enacted. And as I discussed before, if the legislature does reject the first set of plans. If the commission does submit plans, then the commission can submit its second set of plans by February 28th. But under the pending amendment, that deadline is moved up to January 15th. And if that plan, should there be one, is rejected by the legislature, then for the third go around, it's out of the commission's hands. The legislature can then do whatever plan it wants to create, as the Constitution says, quote unquote, as it deems necessary, which allows for a lot of leeway. Now, the governor has veto power over any plans, but no governor has vetoed a redistricting plan since Franklin Roosevelt in 1931. And right now, as I said earlier, the legislature has the votes to override any gubernatorial vetoes. Now, if the commission gets its work done properly and on time, and this goes before the Senate and the Assembly, then under current law, you have to have at least 2/3 of the members of each chamber voting to approve a plan. Had the chambers been divided as things stood when this amendment was first developed in 2012, when the Democrats controlled the Assembly and the Republicans controlled the Senate, then you simply needed a majority of legislators in each body. The constitutional amendment that's being placed on the ballot in November would change the legislative requirement from the 2/3 majority to a simple majority. However, if the commission fails to send plans to the legislature, then you need to have at least 60% of the Senate and Assembly members approve a plan. But at this point, the Democrats have supermajorities in both chambers. They did not contemplate having a supermajority last summer when the constitutional amendment was first drafted. Just to wrap things up on the state process, any New Yorker can go to state Supreme Court to challenge a plan. The new provision being that the trial court has 60 days after the petition was filed to decide, and that while the Constitution is silent on this, appeals can always go to the appellate division and the Court of Appeals, which of course takes more time. And should any plan over time be rejected by a court, the legislature itself, not the commission, will fix the violations in the plan. The constitutional amendment also would make permanent a provision that was enacted by state legislation in 2010 that reallocates prisoners from their prison locations where the census counts them back to their homes of record prior to incarceration for the purposes of redistricting. And this was done for Assembly and Senate districts in 2010. Similarly, counties and cities also followed suit and reallocated prison populations. This was left out of the 2014 constitutional amendment, and over concern that the commission might not reallocate prisoners. In its work this year, the pending amendment would also make permanent prisoner reallocation. A few other things, just to summarize what the amendment would do. It would just require any 7 commission members to approve a plan. It sets January 1st as the deadline for the first commission plan, January 15th for the commission's second plan. It changes the 2/3 requirement, since Democrats control both chambers, to a simple majority. But if the commission fails itself to develop a plan, then you need 60% in each of the Senate and Assembly, which again, the Democrats do have. It sets the Senate size at 63 districts, since in each of the last 4 decades, the then Republican majority increased the size of the Senate by 1 member each decade to compensate for upstate population losses. The amendment also eliminates having partisan co-executive directors, and as I discussed in the last slide, ends prison gerrymandering. Some things that the public can do on becoming involved with redistricting. Once the commission has its funding, has a website and an outreach program, people need to learn about the process. Events similar to the webinar that we're doing today. You should follow the commission's work, testify at the commission hearings. You can write to the commission once they have an email address or a mailing address, send letters to newspapers, and we already see those all the time, and hold informational meetings so that the public really understands this process, since it's a new one and there's more public attention on redistricting than there ever has been before. I'll skip over that part. And this is the end of my formal presentation. What I'm going to do for a minute is show you for the Catskill area some of the population challenges you are facing with redistricting. And what you see here roughly are your state assembly districts. The one I have outlined in with the black border is District 99, which I believe falls in your library area. Each district, looking at the new state population of 20 some odd million people, and you divide that by 150, you get the new average district population increased from 130,000 to 134,674 people. Now, assembly and senate districts can vary in population up to 10%, but if you were to draw each district at zero population deviation or difference, then this district would be 557 people above the median, whereas you see this district here, District 104, that district is underpopulated. This district would need 12,325 people because it's right now underpopulated by minus 9.2%, whereas this district is overpopulated by 0.4%. If you add up 0.4% and 9.2%, you get 10.2%, which exceeds the 10% overall deviation range by 0.2%. So this is where the give and take occurs, where you've got to move people around. Now, this data you're looking at now is not based on the actual census data. It's based on Census Bureau estimates, and we'll have the real data in August. So we'll see whether these districts have to gain or lose or pick up population accordingly. But all the pieces have to fall together, and these lines could all be different, come next year. So that's my presentation, and I'd be glad to answer any questions or comments.
I do have a question. So when the process is complete, how are people notified that they've been moved from one district to the next? Like is it mail? Is it, how does that work?
Well, technically what'll happen is after the lines are enacted and each county board of elections has to then redraw the election districts to fit into the new assembly districts. That might take about 2-3 weeks. And then once the new assembly districts are set with the new election districts, then voters will know what assembly district and what election district they are registered to vote in. Each county board of elections sends out a postcard before each primary to voters to say you live in assembly district 90, election district 45, and you vote at public school 1, 2, 3 in in Newburgh. Now that's the formal way, and people have to get these postcards. The newspapers will cover what's happening with redistricting, and local papers will probably write stories about how the lines were moved. But the informed public can learn on their own by looking at websites, by reading the papers, by just doing some research. But if you're not informed, and this is why we have voting problems, people don't know that their poll place has changed. People will show up at the polls to vote and will ask, what happened to my assemblyman or senator? Why aren't they on the ballot? I've known them for 20 years. Well, your lines were changed, and you might find out the hard way. That will vary, but it's based on the more civically engaged and involved and informed you are, then the better the chances of finding out or learning what the changes are. And the best thing is to get involved with the front end process to make sure that the district lines you want are the lines you get.
And that would be through, where you said like engaging the public.
Public hearings, writing letters, just learning about it. I've been doing a lot of these webinars for libraries, for leagues of women voters, for civic groups, to explain it. And it's a new process. And if you follow my presentation, it could be a complicated process. So you have to be on top of it to know what's going on. Otherwise, you'll see a clip in a paper, Assemblyman Jones, district cut in half, or Orange County to lose so and so. Anything can happen there.
So this may be, and maybe you covered this, and I was trying to take some notes, but there was a lot. If 89 people had been counted in the census, would we still be facing redistricting because of the local counts, or?
Well, if 89, to count 89 more people in New York would also mean that you'd freeze the rest of the country, that if you run the formula all over again with 89 more people in New York, it might mean that Minnesota, which kept its districts by 27 people, could lose a district. It's hard to say whether New York would actually get that district back if you simply added 89 people. Then you'd have to freeze all of the 49 states. But regardless of gaining or losing congressional districts, based on the census, districts have to be equipopulous. That's one person, one vote. So that if, as I showed you with the assembly districts, if they are under or over the necessary population average for a district, given some leeway and deviation, you have to redraw them. If, for argument's sake, assembly districts had to be at zero equal population deviation from each other, then clearly between those two assembly districts I showed you, they'd have to tighten up the numbers, since one is 9%, 9 points below, and one was just half a point above. You have to keep them all within 10%. So if you look at the map, and I'll go back and share so you can see the screen. This website, I'm sorry to give you the address for it, is called redistrictingandyou.org. And I'll try to put it in the chat room when I close this frame out. But this was developed by the City University of New York Graduate Center, and can show you for every Senate, Assembly, and congressional district based on zero population equality. And they do give you an explanation on the left side how this works. I'll just quickly switch over to the state Senate. So here you can see most of the districts in the Catskills area being green means you're overpopulated, brown means you're underpopulated. So you can see here that all of the districts in the really most of them in the upstate New York area are underpopulated. And I don't want to get into too many of the details, but the partisan tactic that was used by the legislature in the past was to underpopulate upstate Senate districts to draw as many Republican ones as possible, and to overpopulate as many downstate districts, mostly in New York City, to create as few Democratic districts as possible. Similarly, in the reverse, when you look at the assembly, the downstate districts were mostly underpopulated, and upstate districts were overpopulated to give the Democrats an advantage in the assembly. So the bottom line is that you have to redraw all the districts at the congressional, state legislative, and local level to make sure they all fit within population standards.
Thank you. You answered my questions. Does
Okay.
anyone have any questions? Oh, go ahead, Pamela.
Hi, I had a question about the pending constitutional amendment. So I saw that you gave us the elements of the amendment. Is there a good place to go to educate yourself on the pros and cons of the elements?
No one has really posted anything about it yet. What I could send Jen is a short paper I did that explains the amendment a bit. I think you will see more about it. The State League of Women Voters is against the amendment. Common Cause is for the amendment. The League of Women Voters does have more information probably than, I'm just not sure if they have anything on this amendment or not, but I'll be glad to find out and send it along to Jen. This will heat up though as November gets closer.
Thank you.
If there are no other questions, I'll thank you all very much for this opportunity to be with you today. And would be glad if you have any questions down the line to please get back in touch.
That would be wonderful. Thank you so much. I appreciate it. Thank you, everyone. We're going to go ahead and end this session. And like I said earlier, I'll be sending a follow-up email. Thank you so much, Jeff, for being here. That was
You're
great.
welcome.
Yeah, that was wonderful. So thank you. And I hope everyone has a really great day.
Okay, bye, everybody. Thank you very much.